A new dawn at Nordheim Castle. In the heart of the Nordheimian capital, a mighty castle stood tall, a symbol of the empire's glory and power. It was here, within these ancient walls, that the true game of thrones began. Katrina, once the quiet bride, had blossomed into a ruler in waiting, a woman whose voice echoed with the strength of steel. And as King Leopold blundered deeper into the quagmire of his own making, Katrina seized her chance. She began to host salons, elegant gatherings in her private chambers, where scholars and rebels alike flocked to listen to her fiery speeches on liberty and progress. It was in these intimate settings that she laid the groundwork for a new Nordheim, one unshackled from the chains of tradition and ruled with intelligence instead of bluster. There was Baron Ernst von Drachenfels, a stern general whose loyalty to the crown had been unwavering. However, his respect for his late Queen Isabella had left him disillusioned with King Leopold's incompetence. He became one of Katrina's most steadfast allies, drawn to her sharp intellect and canny plans. Then there was the enigmatic Father Matthias, a priest who preached radical reforms from the pulpits of the Nordheimian temple. Haunted by a tragic past, Father Matthias sought absolution for his sins by fighting for a better future. He found kindred spirits in Katrina's progressive ideals and became her most ardent supporter among the clergy. The turning point came when Leopold insulted the revered Archbishop Wilhelm during a religious ceremony. Katrina knew this was the moment she'd been waiting for. She quickly sent for Father Matthias and a handful of loyal barons, convening a secret meeting in the dead of night. In hushed tones, they plotted the king's demise. The plan was audacious yet meticulous, a testament to Katrina's cunning. The meeting ended with a solemn oath, sealing their alliance against the inept king. But they needed proof, evidence of Leopold's treason that would rally the public to their cause. Katrina took charge of this mission, enlisting the help of the dashing Captain Nicholas Oswin, her lover and commander of the Royal Guard. Their plan was audacious, a daring infiltration of the Westphalian embassy where Leopold had been meeting with the rival king. Katrina, disguised as a lowly servant, snuck into the embassy alongside Nicholas and Oswin. Others waited nearby, ready to strike if things went awry. Inside, they discovered damning evidence of Leopold's treachery, enough to convince even the most skeptical nobles of his guilt. With the plot thickening, Leopold felt the noose of suspicion tightening around his neck. Aware of the murmurs spreading through the court, he began to panic. This fear morphed into action, erratic and desperate. Leopold decided to flee Nordheim, seeking refuge in Westphalia, the very region that held the key to his undoing. But Katrina was always 2 steps ahead. She had anticipated his flight and prepared accordingly. As Leopold made his escape, Captain Oswin, following Katrina's orders, intercepted the king, bringing him back to Nordheim under guard. The castle, once a symbol of unity, became a battleground. Leopold, backed by a handful of loyalists, barricaded himself in his chambers, demanding to be allowed to flee. Outside, Katrina, along with Baron von Drachenfels and Father Matthias, rallied the troops, preparing to lay siege to the very heart of the castle. The standoff lasted for weeks, each side unwilling to yield. But as food supplies dwindled and whispers of betrayal echoed through the castle walls, Leopold's resolve crumbled. Faced with starvation and the threat of exposure, he agreed to abdicate the throne in exchange for safe passage to Westphalia. It was a humiliating end for a king, but Katrina's strategy had paid off. She had secured control of Nordheim without staining her hands with blood. The quiet girl, who had once been content in the shadows, had emerged victorious, ready to lead her people into a new era. But as the cheers of the populace echoed through the streets, Katrina knew that the true battle was just beginning. The rise of a new Empress Nordheim was in chaos, caught between the allure of change and the weight of tradition. Amidst this turmoil, Katrina made a triumphant entry onto the scene, astride a white horse, her head held high, her eyes blazing with determination. Her entrance was a spectacle, orchestrated to convey power and grace. She wore a custom-made riding habit of the finest black velvet, tailored to accentuate her regal bearing. A simple white plume adorned her hat, a stark contrast to the dark attire and symbolizing her role as a beacon of hope amidst the darkness. The velvet spoke of her refined taste and quiet wealth, while the white plume hinted at her purity of purpose. The crowd roared, their voices echoing her name, chanting it like a battle cry. This was her moment, the culmination of years of planning and a lifetime of ambition. But as she surveyed the cheering crowds, a flicker of sadness crossed her face. Deep down, she knew that her victory had come at a cost measured in shattered relationships and broken dreams. Her heart ached for a simpler past, for the girl who had once dreamed of love amidst the quiet hills of Velberg. Yet there was no turning back. Nordheim was in her hands now, and the future was hers to shape. She rode to the ancient throne room, its grandeur mirroring her own internal struggles. The throne beckoned, cold and imposing, a symbol of power that had been wrested from her husband, Leopold. She knew that to be empress, she must first conquer the fortress of her own emotions. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but she was ready. Dressed in a magnificent gown of midnight blue velvet, she sat upon the throne with a mixture of trepidation and resolve. Her coronation gown was a masterpiece of needlework, a reflection of her journey from the quiet hills of Velsberg to the heart of Nordheim's power. The deep blue symbolized the depths of her ambitions, while intricate silver threads wove tales of her resilience and wit. Above her, the crown shimmered, heavy with jewels and centuries of tradition. As it was placed upon her head, she felt the weight not only of the precious metals and stones, but of the expectations and biases of her new subjects. From that moment, she was no longer just Katrina. She was Empress Katrina, the unrelenting. But despite the splendor of the ceremony, she couldn't shake off a growing unease. It was then that she noticed a figure standing in the shadows near the throne room, a silent observer of this historic event. It was the mysterious Captain Nicholas Oswin, her lover and confidant. His face was pale, his eyes haunted, and as their eyes met, she saw a truth that chilled her. Nicholas had betrayed her, revealing her secret marriage to Leopold and her plans for Nordheim to the king. Leopold, enraged and desperate to save his own skin, had offered to make Nicholas his royal envoy to Westphalia, a reward for his disloyalty. But it was too late for apologies. Nicholas had sealed his fate. The confrontation was brief, a clash of wills between two people once bound by passion. And as the coronation continued, Katrina knew she had a new enemy, an enemy who threatened not only her reign, but her very survival. The coronation ended in triumph, but the victory was bittersweet. As the crowds dispersed, leaving her alone in the vast throne room, Katrina knew that her greatest challenge was yet to come. The machinations of her enemies, especially the sly Nicholas Oswin, were only beginning. And with that, our tale for tonight comes to an end. But don't worry, dear listeners, this is not the end of Katrina's story. We'll be back tomorrow to see how she navigates her treacherous new reality. So be sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode. Until then, remember, power is like a flame. It can warm and enlighten, but burn fiercely if you're not careful. And beware of the wolves in sheep's clothing, for their bite is the sharpest of all. Now, go in peace, and may your dreams be as sharp as your wit. Until next time. The storm was brewing, but Katrina was not caught off guard. She'd seen rumblings on the wind, tasted the bitterness of rebellion in the shadows. Now, as lightning split the sky over Nordheim, she was ready. A queen, you see, must always be 2 steps ahead. Now, listen closely, for this part of our tale has echoes that will resonate long after the last page is turned. This is no fairy story. This is a chronicle of survival, of a woman who defied not just the conventions of her age, but the very forces that sought to confine her to history's footnotes. You know the tales of valiant knights and mystical quests, don't you? Well, here's a hero who fought battles with ink and intellect instead of sword and shield. So let's pull back the velvet curtains of the past and introduce you to Katarina the Unrelenting. Now, if you think you've heard all the stories worth telling, hold on tight, because this is no fairy tale. Katarina, they called her, though the name she cherished was Isabella. Born into the twilight of the Hohenzollern dynasty, in a duchy sandwiched between mighty neighbors, young Isabella grew up under a shroud of fatalism. At least that's what the chroniclers wrote, the ones who spun tales to glorify kings and princes. But we have our doubts about those chronicles. After all, the grand narrative they peddled conveniently ignored the role of a woman who truly held the reins of power. We're talking about Isabella von Brandenburg, a monarch who redefined what it meant to be a sovereign in a world that thought women belonged only in the kitchen, or worse, wed and forgotten. This is a tale not of castles or knights, but of minds and machinations. Our story begins in Berlin in the year 1724. Here, within the hallowed halls of the royal court, lived a little girl whose life was a study in contrasts. Isabella was born into a world of privilege, yet she was an illegitimate child. The daughter of a prince and a courtier, she existed in the uncomfortable half-light of the royal family tree. Her birth certificate, if you can call it that, bore no official record of her father, Duke Joseph, and her mother was barely acknowledged in polite conversation. In that era, legitimacy was everything. It decided one's place in society, one's claim to the throne, one's right to even exist. And young Isabella had none of it. She was a bastard, a word that carried the weight of a death sentence in those times. But here's the paradox. Her mother, Elizabeth, was no simple country girl. She was a lady-in-waiting, a trusted member of the royal court. While her position was elevated, her marriage wasn't. And in that contradiction, little Isabella found her motivation. Growing up, she listened wide-eyed to the adults' hushed conversations, aware that hers was not a life most children could fathom. Each whispered word fueled her determination to make something of herself, to carve out a place in a world that would have rather forgotten her. She devoured books, not just for the amusement of it, but as a tool to build herself a future. The classics became her tutors, teaching her the art of persuasion, the power of rhetoric, and the potential of a well-turned phrase. As she grew older, she moved with the grace of a seasoned diplomat, argued theology with priests, and debated politics until seasoned statesmen broke a sweat. By the time she reached adulthood, she was fluent in 5 languages and knew more about diplomacy than many of the diplomats she encountered. She played the harpsichord beautifully, fenced with the best masters in Berlin, and could ride a horse with the recklessness of youth. She was a warrior princess without a kingdom, an anomaly in a world that expected girls to be demure and docile. But this is no tragedy. This is a tale of quiet triumph. So, as Isabella matured, she began casting her gaze beyond the gilded cage of her upbringing. The Hohenzollern lands, the Margraviate of Brandenburg, Prussia, were teetering on the brink of change. Frederick William I, her uncle and the ruler of the Hohenzollern dynasty, was a man obsessed with legacy. He commissioned grandiose palaces, constructed elaborate monuments, and made sure every inch of his domain echoed with the glories of his lineage. For him, being a Hohenzollern was more than a birthright, it was a burden. He sought to immortalize himself in marble and myth, and now prepare to meet the enigmatic Duchess Anna Sophia. You may not recognize the name, but her actions would shape destinies. She was a patron of the arts, a shrewd politician, and most importantly, a close confidant of the aging Duke. The Duchess recognized the hollowness of Frederick William's grandeur. She saw that true power lay not in ostentatious displays, but in the minds of men. And she chose Isabella, her niece, as the vessel to carry this new power. Under the Duchess's guidance, Isabella honed her skills, learning the intricacies of governance, the nuances of diplomacy, and the secrets of wielding influence. She became her uncle's eyes and ears, a silent force observing, absorbing, and strategizing. But this is no simple story of mentorship. This is a game of thrones played on a chessboard of wits. You see, while Isabella blossomed under the Duchess's tutelage, a shadow loomed on the horizon. King Frederick I of Prussia had his sights set on uniting the Hohenzollern lands under his banner. For him, it was a question of legacy and bloodlines. For Isabella, it was a threat. She knew her uncle's obsession with legacy left Brandenburg vulnerable to her cousin's ambitions. So, she hatched a plan. She positioned herself as the Duke's heir, a move that challenged the very fabric of the dynasty. In doing so, she earned her uncle's ire, but also his begrudging respect. And now brace yourself for a display of strategy so cunning it would put any modern CEO to shame. Isabella negotiated directly with the king, securing an advantageous marriage for herself while safeguarding her domains. She wove a tapestry of alliances, ensuring that her rivals either couldn't touch her or were bound to her by threads of obligation. She was playing a high-stakes game, one where the stakes were not crowns or castles, but the very definition of power. And that brings us to the moment when the world shifted on its axis and fate decided to deal its most audacious hand. In the year 1740, Duke Frederick William passed away, leaving behind a legacy of opulence and indecision. And now, amidst the swirl of coronets and condolences, Isabella made her move. She marched on the capital with an army of loyalists, a testament to the quiet influence she had cultivated over the years. And there, in the grand hall of Königsberg Castle, she seized the throne, establishing her reign as the Duchess of the Margraviate of Brandenburg, Prussia. The very foundations of the Hohenzollern dynasty trembled under her audacious stride. And this is where our story takes a turn from history into legend. For Isabella, born into the shadows, had just stepped into the light. But this was no fairy tale ending. This was just the beginning. In the annals of history, they tell the tale of her coronation as the remarkable rise of Frederick the Great. But what do you know about the woman who paved the way for his legendary rule? Enter Isabella of Brandenburg, a name that deserves to echo through the ages as loudly as any king. The path ahead was fraught with challenges. England, with its growing navy, cast covetous eyes on North America. France, eager to expand its colonial holdings, watched with interest. And the Netherlands, ever the traders, saw opportunity in the new world's riches. It was a tinderbox waiting for a spark. Yet Katerina, much like her namesake, the legendary Russian warrior, saw not division, but potential. She extended a hand of friendship to the English, signing a treaty that set the stage for a glorious alliance. She then embarked on a tour of the Low Countries, skillfully navigating the intricate web of Dutch politics, laying the groundwork for a formidable coalition. Her moves were strategic, her motives clear. Katerina wanted a united front against the French, a force strong enough to protect her hard-won gains. Back in Nordheim, her advisors urged caution. They warned of the dangers of entanglement, of the economic burdens of supporting a colonial war. But Katerina was undeterred. She had tasted power, and she wasn't willing to relinquish it. She allocated substantial funds to the war effort, sending supplies, weapons. Welcome back to my channel. I'm here. We're about to enter the extraordinary life of Catherine the Great. Make sure you watch this series till the end to uncover all her secrets. In 1762, at the tender age of 32, Catherine ascended to the throne of Russia. Her path to power was one fraught with intrigue, conspiracy, and a daring coup d'etat that ousted her husband, Peter III. Yet as the years rolled by, Catherine's initial concerns about legitimacy faded into the winds of history. She reigned not just as Empress of all Russia, but as a force that reshaped the very notion of power, leaving an indelible mark on Russia and Europe. Catherine's early years in Russia were marked by a deep sense of displacement. Born Sophia Augusta Frederica in the Prussian city of Königsberg, she was the daughter of the Duke of Prussia and a member of the Hohenzollern dynasty. Her mother, Princess Sophia of Anhalt-Zerbst, though of German nobility, was viewed as a nobody in the royal pecking order. From an early age, Catherine exhibited a remarkable thirst for knowledge. While the royal family largely ignored her, her aunt, the Landgravine of Hesse-Kassel, provided her with a rich education. Young Sophia immersed herself in books, devouring literature and history. This early exposure to the written word ignited a passion that would shape her destiny. At the age of 15, Catherine's life took a dramatic turn when her mother orchestrated her marriage to the heir to the Russian throne, Peter. The wedding ceremony was a grandiose affair, filled with rituals and traditions that emphasized the union between two powerful states. But behind the opulence and ceremony, Catherine knew that her status as an outsider remained unchanged. She was a foreigner in a distant land, separated from her family and friends, navigating a court where she was often treated as a pawn in political games. Catherine threw herself into her new role, determined to make her presence felt. She studied Russian language and customs assiduously, shedding her German mannerisms and embracing the Russian ways. Her efforts paid off. On June 28, 1762, when Peter's father, Emperor Peter the Great, died, Catherine and Peter returned to Russia as the new imperial couple. Catherine officially became Empress, while Peter, known for his erratic behavior and pro-Prussian sympathies, pursued policies that alienated the Russian nobility. Catherine, ever the astute politician, recognized the precariousness of their position. She understood that Peter's unpopularity could threaten the stability of the empire. As tensions escalated and factions formed at court, Catherine's isolation grew. Peter's dismissal of her advice and his growing closeness to her own mother only deepened her sense of vulnerability. In June of 1762, the fragile facade shattered. Peter's anti-Russian policies and his decision to start a war with the Ottoman Empire pushed the nation to the brink of chaos. Catherine, fearing for her own security and that of her infant son Paul, found herself at a crossroads. With the support of influential courtiers, generals, and her lover, Grigory Orlov, Catherine orchestrated a coup. Peter was deposed, and their roles were reversed. Catherine found herself sharing the throne with the man she once called her husband. But the change in power was not a smooth one. Peter's refusal to accept his dethronement plunged the country into turmoil. Loyalists rose in opposition, leading to a civil war that shook the foundations of the empire. Amidst the chaos, Catherine's son, Paul, was proclaimed the sole heir to the throne, solidifying her position as the de facto ruler. The following months were a whirlwind of activity as Catherine reoriented her government, appointing loyalists to key positions and balancing the interests of the nobility. But even as she consolidated her power, whispers of her past followed her. Rumors circulated about her relationship with Grigory Orlov, and her critics dug into her past, questioning the circumstances of her marriage to Peter. These doubts would forever tarnish Catherine's image, casting a long shadow over her reign. Now let's return to our story. 1 year after ascending to the throne, Catherine formally severed ties with her former husband, divorcing Peter and ending their once tumultuous marriage. This bold move, unprecedented in Russian history, freed her from the constraints of her previous bond and allowed her to solidify her position as the absolute ruler of Russia. No longer tethered to the whims of a dissolute and disgraced Peter, Catherine's focus shifted to securing her legacy and shaping the destiny of Russia. Her reign was marked by a series of ambitious reforms aimed at modernizing the country and enhancing its prestige on the world stage. Catherine's influence extended far beyond the borders of Russia. Her extensive correspondence with prominent figures like Voltaire and Diderot showcased her intellectual pursuits and her desire to engage with the Enlightenment ideals sweeping Europe. She championed education, establishing schools and universities and encouraging the arts and sciences. Her patronage helped to make St. Petersburg a hub of cultural activity, attracting intellectuals and artists from across the continent. Despite these accomplishments, Catherine's story is not without its shadows. Her treatment of the Polish nobles was often harsh, and her decision to annex Polish territories contributed to the decline of Poland as an independent state. Furthermore, her infamous lover, Grigory Orlov, cast a long shadow over her reign, with rumors of his influence tainting her public image. As Catherine's reign progressed, her relationship with her son, Paul, became increasingly strained. Paul, influenced by his counselors, grew resentful of his mother's dominance and began plotting to curtail her power. This rift between mother and son foreshadowed a turbulent chapter in Russian history. As we come to the end of this episode, let's take a moment to reflect on the journey of Catherine the Great thus far. From her humble beginnings in Prussia to her audacious rise to power in Russia, her story has been one of resilience, ambition, and political acumen. But amidst the triumphs and controversies, one question looms large. How did Catherine manage to outmaneuver her rivals, secure her legacy, and reshape Russia in her image? What strategies and alliances did she employ to navigate the treacherous waters of 18th century politics? And what were the defining moments of her reign that solidified her place in history? Join us in the next episode as we continue to explore the extraordinary life of Catherine the Great and discover how she left an indelible mark on the course of Russian history. Thank you for joining me on this journey through history. If you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe to our channel to get notified when new episodes are released. And if you'd like to dive deeper into the stories that shaped our world, check out our podcast, where I host discussions on the most compelling historical events and figures. Thanks for watching. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo on June 28, 1914, was the event that triggered the start of the First World War. However, it was not solely responsible for causing the war. The assassination acted as a catalyst, setting off a chain reaction of events leading to the conflict. Several underlying factors made Europe vulnerable to such a disaster. In the years leading up to the war, Europe had witnessed rapid industrialization, urbanization, and nationalism. These factors contributed to the formation of powerful alliances and rivalries between nations. The assassination of Ferdinand exposed the weaknesses of the existing order and served as the spark that ignited the powder keg of European tensions. Following the Congress of Vienna in 1815, Europe had been dominated by a balance of power system. This system aimed to prevent any single nation from becoming too powerful by creating a network of alliances and maintaining a balance between the interests of the great powers. However, as the 19th century progressed, this system began to erode. One significant development that undermined the balance of power was the rise of German nationalism. The German Confederation, a loose alliance of 39 German states, had been a key element of the post-Napoleonic order. But growing sentiment for unification and the emergence of Prussia and Austria as dominant powers within Germany challenged the existing balance. Prussia's Chancellor, Otto von Bismarck, skillfully manipulated nationalist feelings and went to war with Denmark, winning control of Schleswig-Holstein in 1866. This victory brought Prussia into conflict with Austria, which culminated in the Austro-Prussian War of 1870-71. Bismarck's cunning diplomacy isolated Austria, securing French support against Prussia. However, the war resulted in a decisive Prussian victory, solidifying German nationalism and creating a unified German empire under Prussian leadership in 1871. This significant shift in power challenged the existing balance of Europe. Austria, resentful over losing prestige and territory, sought to reassert itself through a renewed commitment to the Habsburg monarchy. In addition to German nationalism, the scramble for colonies also disrupted the European balance. As European powers competed for overseas territories, rivalries intensified. France and Britain, once allies, grew distant over colonial disputes in Africa and Asia. Meanwhile, the rivalry between Britain and Germany deepened as Germany's naval ambitions challenged British maritime supremacy. These colonial rivalries exacerbated existing tensions and contributed to the formation of hostile alliances. Another critical factor was the emergence of powerful alliances. The Triple Alliance, consisting of Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy, opposed the Triple Entente, which included France, Russia, and Britain. These alliances divided Europe into competing camps and increased the likelihood of a general European war. Furthermore, the alliances were not static. For example, Italy initially sided with the Central Powers during World War I, but eventually switched to the Allies. This fluidity reflected the shifting nature of European politics and the complexities of the alliances. The complex web of alliances that had developed in Europe played a crucial role in escalating the conflict following Ferdinand's assassination. When Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, the alliance system was quickly activated. Germany supported Austria unconditionally, while France and Russia felt obligated to aid Serbia. This network of alliances transformed a regional conflict into a wider European war. Furthermore, the nature of the alliances themselves contributed to the escalation. The Triple Alliance and the Triple Entente represented more than just diplomatic partnerships. They embodied distinct political, economic, and social values. The conflict between these opposing alliances added a layer of ideological struggle to the war, making compromise and diplomacy more difficult. As the war unfolded, the alliances proved to be rigid and inflexible. For instance, Italy's commitment to the Triple Alliance was weakened by its desire to acquire territories in the Adriatic, which were controlled by Austria-Hungary. Similarly, Japan's entry into the war on the side of the Triple Entente can be attributed to its desire to acquire German colonial possessions in the Pacific. The inflexible nature of the alliances prevented nations from pursuing independent foreign policies based on specific interests, instead forcing them to adhere to collective commitments. The complex web of alliances in Europe prior to World War I played a pivotal role in transforming a local conflict into a global war, shaping the course of the 20th century. In addition to the political factors, there was also a strong economic component contributing to the outbreak of the war. The economic competition among European powers fueled rivalries and created tensions that spilled over into the diplomatic arena. During the Industrial Revolution, European nations, particularly Britain, France, Germany, and the United States, experienced unprecedented economic growth. This growth led to increased production, new technologies, and the expansion of trade networks. The quest for raw materials and markets for manufactured goods intensified competition among European powers. Colonial rivalries, as mentioned earlier, were a prominent feature of this economic competition. The race for colonies led to conflicts and tensions as nations sought to acquire resources and strategic positions around the world. Control of territories rich in resources like rubber, copper, and diamonds became a key objective. Moreover, the pursuit of economic dominance extended beyond colonies. Major European powers engaged in a struggle for industrial and military supremacy. Germany's rapid industrialization and growing navy challenged British maritime supremacy and economic dominance. This shift in economic power created anxieties and rivalries, contributing to the overall tension in Europe. The economic competition was also evident in the build-up of weapons and the arms race. As nations sought to protect their interests and secure their positions, they invested heavily in military capabilities. The arms race, particularly between Germany and Britain, further heightened tensions and created an atmosphere of suspicion and mistrust. The economic rivalry was not limited to material factors. There was also a significant diplomatic dimension. Economic interests often shaped foreign policy decisions and influenced diplomatic relationships. Nations formed alliances and made strategic decisions based on perceived economic threats and opportunities. The complex web of economic relationships and rivalries contributed to the formation of hostile alliances, such as the Triple Alliance and the Triple Entente. These alliances divided Europe into competing economic blocs, intensifying the competition and making compromise more difficult. The economic factors leading up to World War I demonstrate how material conditions and the pursuit of wealth and power play a crucial role in shaping international relations and contributing to conflict. In conclusion, the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand was a pivotal event that triggered a series of diplomatic failures and ultimately led to the outbreak of World War I. While the assassination provided the immediate cause, it was not solely responsible for the war. Underlying factors such as nationalism, the decline of the concert of Europe, the arms race, and a complex web of alliances created a tinderbox of tensions and rivalries in Europe. Ferdinand's death acted as the spark that ignited this powder keg, setting off a chain reaction that engulfed the continent in war. The rapid industrialization and economic competition among European powers exacerbated these tensions and fueled the arms race and hostile alliances. As a result, what began as a localized conflict escalated into a wider European war due to the rigid alliance system. The intricate network of alliances divided Europe into opposing camps and prevented diplomatic solutions, plunging the continent into one of the deadliest conflicts in history. To learn more about the causes of World War I, you can check out additional resources on the topic. Exploring these factors provides a deeper understanding of the complex web of events that culminated in the outbreak of the Great War. In the heart of the emerald embrace of South America, where the Andes Mountains met the untamed Amazon, lay a secret so precious it was called El Dorado, the Golden One. From the high peaks to the deepest jungles, the legend of this mythical city sparked a relentless obsession in the conquistadors, driving them to conquer not just land, but their own desires and destinies. We're about to delve into the epic tale of El Dorado, the legend that ignited the greatest conquest of them all. Our journey begins amidst the grandeur of the 16th century Spanish Empire, a time when gold was more than just a metal. It was the key to power, the elixir of immortality, the language of the gods. For the conquistadors, men of ambition and boundless courage, the whispers of El Dorado resonated like a battle cry in their veins. Legend spoke of a great chieftain who bathed in the waters of Lake Guatavina, his skin covered in a layer of gold dust, a mortal made divine. And it didn't just captivate their imaginations, it fueled an insatiable desire to claim not just the gold, but the secret to eternal glory. They ventured forth, not just as explorers, but as pilgrims to a promised land, each step echoing the footsteps of heroes long gone. Yet the quest for El Dorado was not merely a pursuit of gold. It was a confrontation with the heart of darkness that lay within the untamed wilderness. In the Amazon, they battled against the unforgiving terrain, the biting ants, venomous snakes and diseases that stalked their path. They wrestled with the spirits of the forest, facing phantoms of their own fears and doubts. With every mile, the conquistadors confronted not just the elements, but the demons that lurked within the recesses of their souls. The quest became a pilgrimage into the abyss of human ambition, where the line between glory and damnation was as thin as the glint of gold on a blade. As they ventured deeper into the Emerald Labyrinth, they encountered not just the wrath of nature, but the defiance of its inhabitants. They clashed with tribes whose traditions ran deeper than the conquistadors' dreams of empire. Each battle was a clash of worlds, a collision of cultures that left scars upon the land and souls that ran deeper than any wound. The conquistadors were not just fighting for gold, they were waging war on a world that refused to bend to their will. Their thirst for gold turned into a desperate scramble, a mad dash into the heart of the unknown. Legends spoke of rivers flowing with gold, mountains that gleamed like beacons in the night, and temples that hid unimaginable treasures. Fueled by desperation and the echo of those tales, they ventured into the darkest depths of the jungle. But the golden cities they sought remained elusive, shimmering mirages that mocked their every step. The reality was a cruel jest, a jungle that offered no gold, only despair. The conquistadors were caught in a gilded cage of their own making, trapped in a labyrinth where gold turned to dust and dreams turned to nightmares. Amidst this desperate chase, the conquistadors began to turn on each other, bound by ambition, but held together by fear. Trust withered in the face of dwindling rations and fading hopes. Betrayal became a shadow that stalked their campfires, and suspicion turned companions into enemies. The jungle, once a realm of adventure, transformed into a battleground where the only law was survival, where the pursuit of El Dorado tore apart the very fabric of brotherhood. They delved into the myths and legends that swirled around them, seeking any clue to unravel the enigma of El Dorado. In the whispers of the wind, they heard echoes of the past, stories of a golden city that could either guide them to untold riches or lead them further into the heart of the jungle. The conquistadors were not just searching for gold, they were chasing phantoms, their every move dictated by the myths that danced on the edge of their vision. And in the process, they lost not just their grip on reality, but their humanity as well. As they vanished deeper into the Emerald Labyrinth, their minds became canvases on which the jungle painted its most intricate masterpiece: madness. Sir Francis Drake was an enigma wrapped in buckskin and audacity. With a heart as wild as the sea and a mind as sharp as his cutlass, he roamed the new world with a purpose that burned brighter than gold. While the Spanish dreamed of El Dorado in the heart of the jungle, Drake sought his fortune along the wild coastlines and uncharted rivers of the Americas. He was a privateer, sailing under the banner of Queen Elizabeth, a legendary seafarer whose exploits challenged the very foundations of empire. For Drake, El Dorado was not a myth to be chased, but a riddle to be solved, a secret to be unveiled. He saw the obsession of his rivals as a distraction, a fever that blinded them to the real opportunities that lay along the coast. While others clawed their way through the jungle, he explored the untamed rivers, pushing westward, driven by the belief that the greatest fortunes were often found where no one was looking. Drake was a pioneer, mapping new lands and charting new possibilities, his ships carving trails through the uncharted seas. His legacy is a testament to the power of curiosity, a reminder that sometimes the greatest treasures lie not in the heart of the jungle, but at its edge. Imagine, if you will, a world where men abandoned not just the quest for gold, but the very concept of El Dorado itself, turning their backs on the legend and embracing a new dawn of understanding. These were not men who succumbed to fear, but those who chose knowledge over delusion, understanding over obsession. In a world obsessed with the Golden One, they stood apart, seeking not to conquer, but to learn. They were scientists, explorers, and scholars, each carrying a thirst for understanding that rivaled the conquistadors' lust for gold. With telescopes and microscopes, they peered into the heavens and the depths of the smallest creatures, unraveling the mysteries of the universe and the secrets of life. These were the men who looked to the stars and saw not just gold, but reflections of distant suns. They sailed the seas not to conquer but to discover, charting not empires, but the unknown reaches of the world. In a world consumed by the myth of El Dorado, they chose to walk a different path, one that led them not to golden cities, but to the boundless riches of knowledge. Their journey was not marked by battles or bloodshed, but by discoveries that reshaped the world's understanding. They unearthed not golden artifacts, but fossils that whispered of ancient giants and creatures long gone. They mapped not uncharted territories, but the intricacies of the human body, laying the foundations of modern medicine. But how does their journey challenge the notion of El Dorado? It does so by offering an alternative path to fulfillment, a route that doesn't depend on conquest, wealth, or even the discovery of mythical places. Instead, it highlights the power of knowledge, exploration, and scientific inquiry. It suggests that true fulfillment can be found not in material possessions or the subjugation of others, but in understanding the world and our place in it. Furthermore, their dedication to knowledge and exploration, symbolized by the telescope and microscope, represents a departure from the conquistadors' obsession with gold. It symbolizes a shift in focus from material wealth and power to intellectual pursuits and scientific advancement. This challenges the core values of the El Dorado myth, which centers around the pursuit of gold and the accumulation of wealth. However, in a world consumed by the allure of gold, they remained steadfast in their commitment to learning, becoming beacons of enlightenment in a society teetering on the edge of obsession. This presents an interesting contrast between two ways of interacting with the world. The conquistadors saw the world as something to be conquered, dominated, and exploited for personal gain. They approached it with weapons and armor, ready to subdue anything that stood in their way. The explorers and scientists, on the other hand, saw the world as something to be understood, appreciated, and studied for its inherent value. They came armed not with swords and shields, but with notebooks, microscopes, and compasses. Their goal wasn't to extract gold from the earth or enslave its inhabitants, but to understand its complexities and marvel at its wonders. And finally, it celebrates the triumph of the human spirit in the face of adversity. It shows that the thirst for knowledge and the desire to explore can be powerful motivators, capable of guiding individuals beyond the confines of societal norms and expectations. The explorers and scientists serve as inspirations, demonstrating that one can forge their own path, embrace curiosity, and pursue intellectual endeavors regardless of the prevailing obsession with material wealth and conquest. They symbolize the power of the human mind and the potential for discovery and understanding in a world that often glorifies brute force and material gain. The legend of El Dorado continues to resonate because it reflects our deepest desires and our capacity. The year is 1541, and Spain's famed conquistador Francisco Pizarro has just laid waste to the Inca Empire, leaving behind a landscape marked by death and destruction. Meanwhile, high up in the Andes Mountains, secluded from the conquistador's bloodlust, is a small village that has survived for centuries, untouched by the outside world. However, the villagers hear rumors of a mysterious lake, El Dorado, said to be adorned with immense golden ornaments and ruled over by a powerful lord. Intrigued by tales of the magnificent lake, a young man named Pablo sets out on a journey to find it. Along his travels, he meets two elderly hermits who, inspired by visions and prophecies, have devoted their lives to reaching the sacred lake. They invite Pablo to join them, and together they venture deeper into the mountains, following the clues that hint at El Dorado's existence. As they navigate treacherous terrain and encounter dangerous wildlife, They also face opposition from the Spanish, who are desperate to seize control of any rumored riches. Pablo's determination strengthens with each step, and although the trio suffers setbacks, including the death of one of the hermits, their quest continues. Eventually, they come across a mountain range, thought to be insurmountable, but undeterred, they decide to scale it. After weeks of arduous climbing, they finally reach the top, only to discover a lush valley on the other side, rich with fertile fields and inhabited by a peaceful tribe unlike any they have seen before. This tribe welcomes them warmly, revealing that they themselves are on a mission to reach El Dorado. They explain that their leader has prophesied the arrival of 3 outsiders who will guide them to the lake. Recognizing that their journeys coincide, the villagers offer to help Pablo and the remaining hermit reach El Dorado. Together, they descend into the heart of the valley, following a river that leads them closer to their goal. As they approach the lake, they encounter more obstacles, including a group of armed men who attempt to stop them. A fierce battle ensues, but in the end, good triumphs over evil and the quest continues. Finally, they arrive at the shores of El Dorado, stunned by its beauty. The lake shimmers with golden light, and its banks are adorned with precious stones. A magnificent temple stands at its center, and it is here that the true story of El Dorado unfolds. A tale of wisdom, magic, and a king who has dedicated his life to protecting the natural world. The rest of the film follows Pablo's adventures as he explores this extraordinary realm, learns valuable lessons about humility and responsibility, and discovers the true meaning of heroism. Through his experiences, the film emphasizes the importance of cultural understanding, environmental protection, and the strength of the human spirit. In the midst of all the action and adventure, the film delves into the spiritual and philosophical aspects of El Dorado, raising questions about faith, fate, and the nature of reality. Pablo grapples with his beliefs as he witnesses the power of the natural world and the wisdom of the indigenous people. He learns about their deep connection to the spiritual realm and their reverence for the sacred lake. Throughout his journey, Pablo is guided by the enigmatic hermit, who acts as a mentor and helps him navigate not only the physical challenges, but also the spiritual ones. The hermit teaches Pablo the importance of inner wisdom, the power of intention, and the interconnectedness of all things. Pablo's own wisdom grows as he interacts with the villagers and their leader, gaining insight into the true purpose of his quest. He realizes that El Dorado is not just a place, but a state of being. It represents a harmonious relationship with nature, a deep sense of community, and a profound understanding of the universe. The film culminates in a final confrontation between good and evil, where Pablo must use all the wisdom and skills he has acquired on his journey to protect El Dorado and its inhabitants. He learns that true heroism lies not in physical strength or material wealth, but in the courage to stand up for what is right, the compassion to help others, and the wisdom to understand the interconnectedness of all things. In the end, El Dorado becomes a metaphor for the potential for enlightenment and transformation that exists within each of us. Pablo's journey mirrors our own path to self-discovery and spiritual growth. The film encourages us to look beyond the material world and to seek the deeper meaning and beauty that lies within nature, culture, and the human spirit. But why should you watch it? Well, first, it is a thrilling adventure that will keep you on the edge of your seat. The journey to El Dorado is fraught with danger and excitement, and you'll feel like you're right there with Pablo as he faces each new challenge. Second, it is a visually stunning experience. The film captures the beauty of the natural world, from the majestic mountains to the sparkling lake, creating a world that is both familiar and magical. You'll feel like you're exploring uncharted territories alongside Pablo and his companions. Third, It is a thought-provoking exploration of important themes such as cultural understanding, environmental protection, and the search for meaning. The film challenges us to consider our relationship with the natural world and the importance of preserving its beauty and wisdom. You'll leave the film with a newfound appreciation for the richness and diversity of our planet and its people. Fourth, it is a celebration of the human spirit. Despite the challenges he faces, Pablo never gives up hope. He remains curious, compassionate, and courageous throughout his journey. You'll be inspired by Pablo's determination and his unwavering belief in the power of good to triumph over evil. Overall, the film is a must-watch for anyone who loves adventure, fantasy, and films that stay with you long after the credits have rolled. So grab some popcorn, settle in, and get ready to embark on a journey that will take you to a world beyond your wildest dreams. Don't forget to share your thoughts on the film in the comments below. Why do you love it? What did you find most thought-provoking or inspiring? Your comments could help others discover the magic of the film and inspire them to embark on their own journey to El Dorado. So let the adventure begin. But while we talk about the Olympic Games today, it's important to remember that for the ancient Greeks, they weren't called the Olympics. They didn't have a name. The Games were simply known as the contests in honor of the gods. This phrase might seem quaint today, but to the ancient Greeks it was more than a way of naming an event. It was a philosophy of life. Everything in the ancient world was filtered through religion. Politics, art, even daily chores were seen as ways of pleasing the gods or avoiding their wrath. And the Olympic Games were no exception. In fact, the Greeks believed that these games were more than just a human creation. They were, in a sense, a divine institution. It all started with a myth about a giant named Alpheus. Now, this guy wasn't just any giant. He was the son of Poseidon, the god of the sea, and he really wanted to marry the beautiful goddess Daphne. But you know how it goes with the gods. Just because you want something doesn't mean you can have it. In fact, if the gods don't feel like giving you what you want, they usually just say no. And that's exactly what happened to Alpheus. As he chased Daphne through the forest, she prayed to her father, the god Apollo, and he turned her into a laurel tree. Then Apollo just casually decided to hold a festival in her honor. And to make things worse, he awarded the victor of a foot race with the very laurel she had turned into. Yeah, just a little salt in the wound there. Now, you might think that this story has nothing to do with the Olympic Games. After all, it's not like they started celebrating the god Apollo in ancient Greece. But you'd be wrong. This seemingly random story was actually the origin myth of the Olympics. In other words, it explained why the games were held, who they honored, and what the prizes were for. And if you want to understand the ancient Olympic Games, you have to start here. You see, the ancient Greeks weren't just superstitious, they were deeply philosophical. They thought about the nature of the universe and humanity's place in it like no other civilization before them. They grappled with questions of good and evil, beauty and ugliness, life and death. And they found answers in the natural world, in the stories of the gods, and yes, in the contests held in honor of those gods. The Greeks believed that the universe was fundamentally ordered. They saw patterns in the cycles of the seasons, the paths of the planets, and the lives of mortals, and they used these patterns to try to understand their place in the grand scheme of things. Now let's get back to our story. When the hero Heracles ascended to godhood after his death, he took the title of the Ever Victorious. This was a reference to his many victories in athletic competitions, which the Greeks associated with strength, courage, and self-discipline. These qualities weren't just admirable, they were divine. To the Greeks, the human body was a temple of the gods, and athletics was a way of honoring that temple through hard work and dedication. The ancient Olympic Games were not just a celebration of physical prowess, they were a celebration of the human potential for greatness. Sure, the Greeks liked to gloat about their superiority to other civilizations, but they also revered the Olympics as a uniquely human endeavor. They believed that only humans could push their bodies to such extremes, and they admired anyone who dared to challenge the limits of endurance, speed, and strength. Of course, the Greeks weren't saints. They loved to boast about their victories and belittle their opponents, but beneath all that bluster, they knew that the games were a testament to the greatness of the human spirit. In a world filled with strife and suffering, the Olympics were a rare moment of unity and camaraderie. For a few precious days, the Greeks could forget their differences and celebrate what they had in common. Maybe that's why the ancient Olympic Games continue to fascinate us today. They remind us of the power of the human body, the importance of sportsmanship, and the unifying force of great feats of endurance. Sure, the modern Olympics are a shadow of their former selves, but they still hold a special place in our hearts. And maybe that's enough. In the heart of Greece, nestled amidst mountains that clawed at the sky and bathed in the warm glow of an eternal summer, lay the sanctuary of Olympia. Here, amidst temples and altars and groves, there was a clearing ringed by towering columns, silent sentinels of ages past. This was the stadium, the stage where mortals came to enact their own versions of divinity. For 4 days, every 4 years, the world outside ceased to exist. Rivalries were forgotten, boundaries dissolved, and men gathered as equals beneath the watchful gaze of Zeus himself. What followed were 8 days that shook the very foundations of Greek society. Days when the polis, the city-state, with its rigid laws and social hierarchies, seemed a world away. Days when men walked barefoot and bronzed by the sun and unashamed. No elaborate garments hid their bodies, no expensive perfumes masked their musky scent, for here the air itself was perfumed with the sweat of exertion and the dust of 1,000 victories. And at the center of this strange, untamed freedom were the statues of gods and heroes, frozen in marble poses, watching silently over the proceedings. Their stern gazes demanding not just victory, but excellence. Runners frozen mid-stride, discus throwers with backs taut as bowstrings, wrestlers locked in an eternal struggle of muscle and resolve. These were not just images of men, they were ideals. In marble and bronze, the Greeks carved their understanding of virtue, strength, beauty, balance, and the courage to lay it all bare. These statues were not mere decorations, but silent witnesses, capturing in cold stone the soul of the games. They were a reminder that the contest was not just about the flesh and blood competitors, but about something older and vaster, a tribute to the heroes of old and a dedication to the values that bound the Greeks together despite their endless rivalries. And then the day arrived. On a dais stood a priestess, her white robe a beacon against the dark earth. She held aloft a branch of the sacred olive, its leaves rustling in the wind, a symbol of peace, of unity, of the games themselves. She raised it high, declaring, "Let the games begin." And with her words, the world of order and rules fell away. For 8 glorious days, there were no citizens, no slaves, no generals, no scholars. There was only the pursuit of excellence, of arete, and the joy of shared humanity. All Greece put aside its squabbles and assembled under the rule of Zeus. For a brief moment, every 4 years, the Greeks found a way to transcend their endless rivalries. They found a way to honor not just the gods, but the better angels of their own nature. For a moment, they forgot that they were Aetolians or Corinthians or Thespians. They were simply Greeks. Men and women from across the divided regions of Greece, from the sun-drenched shores of the Peloponnese to the misty peaks of the north, journeyed to Olympia. With offerings in hand and hearts full of hope, they came to pay homage to the gods and to compete in the time-honored contests. These were not mere athletes, but representatives of the polis, ambassadors of their city-states. And with them came poets, philosophers, and statesmen, eager to witness the spectacle and soak in the atmosphere of unity. Among them, a special group stood out, the Ginai Komonai, the unmarried girls who acted as priestesses and attendants. While women were largely barred from the games, these young girls were permitted to witness the ceremonies and competitions. But their presence was limited to specific areas, and their role was strictly religious and supportive. The men who competed in the Olympics were not competing for themselves. They were representing their polis, their city-state. Victory was not a personal triumph, but a glory shared by all. The poet Pindar captured this perfectly, celebrating the champions not just for their individual prowess, but for the honor they brought to their homeland. For the Greeks, the games were not just about competition, they were about community, about coming together to celebrate the best of humanity. They were about proving, if only for a heartbeat, that mortal men could stand shoulder to shoulder with the divine. It was a strange sight that greeted the pilgrims who ascended the Altis. Amidst the trees, a wide expanse of level ground, a carpet of emerald softened by the cloying fragrance of myrrh. Here, the solemn oath was taken by the competitors, a pledge of fair play and good sportsmanship. For the Greeks, competition was not about cheating or exploiting any loophole, but about pushing oneself to the limit with honor and grace. After the oath, the festivities began, a riot of music, dancing, and poetry. The air was thick with excitement as the athletes prepared to enter the arena. When the time came, they emerged from the tunnel leading to the stadium, their bodies oiled and ready, their muscles glistening like polished bronze. The crowd erupted, not just with cheers, but with a roar that echoed through the mountains. The spectacle of the nude athlete was not shocking or obscene to the Greeks. It was commonplace. In fact, such nudity was not a sign of shame, but of devotion. To compete, unclothed, was to become a living offering, a testament of flesh to the gods above. The games were a celebration of the human form, of its strength, beauty, and resilience. It was an affirmation of the idea that the body, when honed and trained, becomes a thing of wonder. And as the crowds roared their approval, the athletes basked in the adulation, knowing that they were not just competing for themselves, but for the glory of their polis, for the admiration of their peers. For the Greeks, it was not just about winning, it was about participating in a tradition that connected them to their ancestors and their descendants, a tradition that honored the human spirit's eternal quest for excellence. But what did it mean to win? What was the reward for enduring months of grueling training, for pushing the body to its limits, for enduring pain and exhaustion? The answer lay at the end of each contest, the sacred wreath. It was not a golden crown, no shimmering diadem of precious metals. It was a simple circlet of olive branches woven by the priestesses themselves. Its leaves were freshly cut from the sacred grove of Zeus, imbued with the spirit of the king of the gods. The kotinos, as it was called, was a symbol of divine favor, a tangible link between the mortal realm and the Olympian heights. To win at Olympia was the ultimate achievement, a glimpse of immortality. The victor was elevated on the shoulders of his companions, raised up to become a living god, at least for that glorious moment. And then came the celebrations. Songs were composed in his honor, poems that would echo his deeds for generations to come. Statues were erected in his likeness, capturing his essence in cold marble, and the stories of his triumphs were told and retold until they became part of local lore. The victors were wined and dined. Their photographs adorned the walls of noble houses. They were given lifetime seats in the theater and free meals for their families. They became part of the civic life of their polis, their names whispered in reverence by the elders, their deeds used as examples for the younger generation. But perhaps the greatest reward was the internal one, the satisfaction of knowing that they had achieved the pinnacle of athletic excellence. They were the best of the best, the embodiment of the Greek ideal of arete, the perfection of the self. The Olympic Games were not just a series of competitions, they were rituals as sacred as any prayer. Every leap, every throw, every pulse of sweat carried the weight of something older than memory. In Olympia, sport was worship, the movement of the body an offering laid at the feet of the gods. At the center of all this devotion stood Zeus, the Thunder King of Olympus, the divine patron of the games. Before the contests could begin, before the olive wreaths could be woven, there was blood to be spilled. A great sacrifice was made at his altar, a testament of flesh and bone that reminded every man who entered the arena that victory was not theirs to claim, but his to grant. Dozens of oxen were led to the altar, their lifeblood feeding the sacred mound of ash that had grown for centuries. This was no mere gesture. It was the heart of the games, a reminder that the sweat of the athlete was not the only offering demanded by the gods. As the games reached their crescendo, the crowds thundered with excitement. From the long jump to the javelin throw, each event was a display of not just physical prowess, but mental acuity. The Greeks understood that victory was not solely a matter of brute force, but of strategy, balance, and control. The winners were not merely the strongest, but the most skillful, the most disciplined, The streets were filled with the clang of hammers and the shouts of slaves. Demetrius was determined that not a single stone of the Colossus of Rhodes would go unmoved. All the island's able-bodied men were drafted to the fight. Soldiers took up the shield alongside poets, scribes alongside statesmen. The struggle was bitter, the losses heavier. By the 7th month, Rhodes was hanging by a thread. Food grew scarce, hope even more so. As morale waned, rumors spread. Many claimed the Colossus would fall, that Rhodian blood ran cold with fear. But amidst this, a handful of rebels stayed behind. Chares of Lindos, a sculptor of modest means, found himself among them. While others fled, he chose to stay. In his heart, a fierce loyalty burned. It wasn't just his homeland he fought for. It was the legacy of Helios, the Titan god whose fiery chariot blazed across the sky each day. Helios was not just a deity. He was a symbol of the Rhodians' indomitable spirit. They were named after him, and he was theirs to protect. As Demetrius tightened his grip, Chares felt the familiar pang of frustration. He was just a sculptor, destined to coax beauty out of marble and stone. How could he sway the tide of war? Then inspiration struck. If he couldn't stop Demetrius's armies, perhaps he could strike at the heart of his arrogance, the Colossus of Rhodes, the boastful monument that loomed over the city. It was designed to be invincible, but what if it could be undone not with brute force, but with art? In secret, hidden from prying eyes and ears, Chares and his companions set to work. They planned meticulously. The strategy had to be perfect. One false move, and it wouldn't be the statue that fell, but their heads. So began the longest game of cat and mouse in history. Under the cloak of night, while Demetrius reveled in his victories, unaware of the silent sabotage unfolding beneath his nose. Ares and his team chipped away at the bedrock beneath the Colossus's feet. Slowly, painstakingly, they weakened the foundations. It was backbreaking work, fraught with danger, yet they persevered. Ares knew the fate of his island rested on their backs, and fear gave way to a singular focus. They had to succeed. Rhodes had to survive. Time ticked by in agonizing slowness. The siege dragged on. Then finally, fortune smiled upon the Rhodians. Demetrius's attention shifted elsewhere, leaving the Colossus somewhat unguarded. It was now or never. Under the cover of darkness, Chares and his comrades crept beneath the statue's shadow. Their tools glistened in the moonlight, ready to deliver the final blow. The stakes couldn't be higher. If discovered, they risked execution. But they were driven by a cause larger than any fear. When the moon was high, they made their move. Each stroke of their chisels echoed with the fate of Rhodes. With every chip of stone, they stole another inch of the Colossus's invincibility. It was a battle waged without armor or weapons, but it was no less perilous. At dawn, the first rays of sunlight slanted through the gaps in the Colossus's legs. Chares and his team raced home, their faces grim with fatigue, but triumphant nonetheless. As Helios ascended his celestial chariot, the Colossus swayed precariously, then toppled into the sea with a roar that shook the very foundations of the city. Silence descended. It was broken only by the lapping of waves against stone. The Colossus lay where it fell, an ironic end for a monument of hubris. Yet the joy was short-lived. Rhodes was battered, its treasury depleted from the long siege. How could they afford to rebuild, let alone construct a new wonder to replace the fallen Colossus? Enter Lysippus of Sicyon, a sculptor of unparalleled skill. He had journeyed to Rhodes for the sole purpose of erecting a memorial worthy of Helios. But when he saw the Colossus shattered at the harbor's edge, his plans changed. This was the ultimate challenge, to raise the god of the sun from the depths of the sea. It was a gamble, but a necessary one. Rhodes needed a symbol of rebirth, a beacon that despite their trials, they could rise again. Lysippus accepted the commission and put his genius to work. The Colosseum was gone, replaced by a grander vision of Helios astride his quadriga. It was a masterpiece that blended divinity and humanity. Helios, the Titan, was immortalized in bronze, his brow furrowed with the effort of guiding his sun-strewn chariot. His horses reared, frozen mid-stride, as if pulling away from the scorching heat of the sun. The statue towered over the harbor, its grandeur a defiant salute to the gods and to the ambitions of men. In crafting this wonder, Lysippus employed every trick of his trade, every nuance of form and texture to capture the essence of Helios. The play of light and shadow, the glint of sweat on bare skin, the tension in taut muscles poised for action, all were rendered with masterful precision. The statue was not just a work of art, it was a poem of dedication, an ode to a city's resilience. News of the Colossus of Rhodes spread like wildfire, drawing pilgrims from across the Mediterranean. Scholars marveled at its colossal scale, while poets wove tales of Helios's triumph over the sea. It became one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, a beacon of artistic achievement and a symbol of Rhodes' unbreakable spirit. But as with all things mortal, the Colossus's reign was not destined to last. In 226 BCE, a mighty earthquake shook the island, its tremors echoing across the Aegean. When the earth stilled, the Colossus was gone, lost to the waves forever. Only fragmented pieces remained, silent witnesses to a marvel that had been. Imagine if someone told you your country's going to war. You feel fear, maybe sadness, anticipation. How about if someone said, we're building a tower, a huge tower that will take 8 years to build. That tower is called the Eiffel Tower. It took 8 years to build. What if I told you that the biggest statue in the world took 12 years to make? Meet the Colossus of Rhodes. Around 292 BC, Rome was fighting against many kingdoms. It's actually considered the end of the Hellenistic period. In the east, Ptolemy I, who was ruling Egypt, and Demetrius Poliorcetes, who was ruling Macedonia, were fighting for supremacy. Both sides were allies with different Greek city-states. One of those states was Rhodes, which sided with Ptolemy. So Demetri decided to teach them a lesson. So Demetri set out with his army and laid siege to the city. The city of Rhodes was well fortified, protected by tall walls, designed by the best architects of that time. But Demetri was no fool. He knew that a direct assault would cost him dearly. So he decided to build towers and machines to destroy the walls. Chief among these was the Helepolis, the taker of cities, a siege tower 9 stories high, clad in iron and bristling with catapults. It was a fortress on wheels, a mountain of death that rolled inexorably toward the city walls. Rhodes, by contrast, was small, a jewel of trade and diplomacy, rich from its position between east and west, but no match in raw might for the army that now darkened its harbors. Demetrius came not just to conquer, but to punish. For Rhodes had dared to side with Egypt, Demetrius's rival in the endless dance of Hellenistic politics. The city should have fallen in a matter of days. It didn't. For nearly a year, the Rhodians held their ground. They turned the walls of their city into a living shield, adapting with a speed and cunning that turned Demetrius's strength against him. At night, they slipped out to burn siege engines. They cut supply lines with the precision of a surgeon's knife. Even the massive Helepolis, that iron mountain, was humbled by their ingenuity, its iron plates drenched in oil and set ablaze, leaving it to smolder in the shadow of the city it could not breach. When the siege finally broke, it was Demetrius who withdrew in humiliation, leaving behind a city still standing and a reputation in tatters. The spoils of war were not plundered cities or conquered lands, but the abandoned relics of the siege itself, broken catapults, shattered towers, and thousands of pounds of iron and bronze. The Rhodians, scarred but unbroken, saw in these ruins not just the remnants of an attack, but the raw material of a new triumph. They would not melt the iron into new weapons. Not this time. They would forge a monument, an answer to every enemy who would ever dare to test their spirit. They chose to honor Helios, god of the sun, who they believed had watched over them as the siege ground on. Helios was no distant figure in the Rhodian imagination. He was the light on every wave in the harbor, the warmth that turned their island into a garden. He was the city's guardian, and now he would be given form. To bring this vision to life, they turned to Charis of Lindos, a sculptor whose name was already known for precision and ambition. Charis was a student of Lysippos, the man who had given Alexander the Great to the world in bronze and marble. Charis understood the power of proportion, the grace of movement captured in stillness. But what he was asked to build was more than art. It was a statement that would echo across the Aegean. From the battered remains of the siege, Charis envisioned something the world had never seen. A statue that would stand over 30 meters tall, taller than any building in the city, taller even than the masts of the ships that carried Rhodian trade to every corner of the sea. The Colossus of Rhodes would be more than a monument. It would be a declaration cast in bronze, a defiance that would stand for generations. Rhodes was not a wealthy city, so they saved up money for 60 years to construct the monument. The people of Rhodes wanted to impress everyone who visited their city. The Colossus of Rhodes was a symbol of their prosperity and power. It was a warning to future invaders that they would not be welcomed. Rhodes stood tall. Rhodes stands tall. In the end, Rhodes won. Not only did they manage to scare off Demetrius Poliorcetes, but they also built the most impressive statue in the world. The Colossus of Rhodes was a feat of ambition and engineering so grand that even today, centuries after it fell, its legend still towers in the imagination of humankind. It rose from the battered pride of a city that refused to kneel and took the weapons of its would-be conquerors and turned them into a message cast in bronze. Rhodes stands unbroken. At its final height of over 100 feet, nearly the size of a modern 10-story building, the statue of Helios was a testament to technical mastery and indomitable spirit. It was an achievement that seemed to stretch the limits of what mortal hands could accomplish, a statement in bronze and stone that spoke to every ship that sailed into the Rhodian harbor. Here stands a city that could not be conquered. The materials themselves carried a poetry of transformation. The bronze that became the skin of the sun god was not newly minted. It had once been the weapons of war, the siege engines and armor of Demetrius the Besieger's failed campaign. The Rhodians took the tools of their near destruction and melted them down to forge their protector. In every shimmering plate, every inch of polished bronze, there was a silent promise: never again. The construction began around 292 BCE and stretched over 12 years, each day a testament to the patient determination of a people who believed in what they were building. The statue was raised not in a single glorious moment, but in a slow, deliberate symphony of labor. Craftsmen and workers toiled beneath the hot sun, their sweat mixing with the dust of the city's wounds. The rhythmic clang of hammer on bronze echoed through the harbor as each piece was shaped and set in place. Engineers believed the Colossus was built from the ground up, each section carefully cast, hoisted, and reinforced as the statue climbed ever higher. Perhaps they used massive earthen ramps, a temporary mountain that rose along with the figure of Helios, lifting them to the sky until the god's head could look out across the waters. Then, when the final bronze plates had been secured and the final joints hidden within the framework of iron and stone, the ramps were cleared away, leaving only the towering sun god to greet the dawn. No ancient images survive to show us exactly how he stood, but poets and chroniclers left us hints: a figure upright, youthful, and serene. Some believed he raised one hand to shield his eyes against the brilliance of his own sun, a gesture both proud and eternal. Others imagined his arm lifted in greeting, a silent benediction over the harbor and the people who called it home. His face was calm, his gaze cast eastward, across the sea that was Rhodes's lifeblood. The engineering was nothing short of miraculous. Each bronze plate was shaped with the precision of a sculptor, chisel, and the strength of an iron forger, hammer. They were locked into an internal skeleton of stone and iron, a hidden framework that held the statue's impossible weight and gave it life. The Rhodians, guided by Charis of Lindos and his mastery of form and balance, understood how to distribute that weight, how to keep the bronze giant from toppling in the island winds. When the last bronze plate was set in place, the Colossus was more than a statue. It was a statement, a sentinel, a promise cast in the warm light of the Aegean sun. The myths that later claimed it straddled the harbor, legs apart as ships sailed beneath it, are likely no more than the dreams of poets and storytellers. Practical minds and modern scholars know that such a pose would have been impossible, the weight too great and the strain too fatal. Instead, the Colossus stood watch from the edge of the harbor, perhaps atop a stone pedestal, where the first rays of dawn would gild its crown of sunbeams. For the Rhodians, this was more than an idol. In Helios, they had cast their defiance and their gratitude. They had turned the relics of war into a monument of peace and pride. Every merchant who entered the harbor, every diplomat who stepped ashore, saw not just a statue, but a city that had survived the siege and had turned its scars into something magnificent. Visitors stood in awe beneath Helios's bronze gaze. They saw not just the gleaming plates that caught the morning light like the first breath of dawn, but the spirit of a people who had refused to break. The Colossus was their pride, their protector, and their message to the world. This is Rhodes, and it stands tall. For 56 years, the Colossus was a fixture in the Rhodian sky. It was a silent witness to the tides of trade, the ebb and flow of life on the sun-kissed island. It saw generations come and go, each leaving their own story to the winds of the Aegean. It marked the passing of seasons, the golden hues of summer fading to the... Welcome back to my channel. Today's big question: should we rebuild it? Back in 280 BCE, the citizens of Rhodes didn't have to deal with HOA regulations, Byzantine bureaucracy, or rude comments from strangers on Twitter. But they did have to contend with one pretty big problem, namely, they had a broken city wall, a scarcity of building materials, and a hefty tab from the sculptor who designed the 33-meter-tall bronze statue of Helios the Titan, god of the sun, that locals affectionately called the Colossus of Rhodes. And those are all problems you can solve with one simple solution: stone. Stone is cheap, plentiful, fire retardant, and can withstand the occasional battering ram. So when Rhodes needed some fortification, it was a no-brainer to use stone to fix a crumbling wall. But Rhodes also had another option. They could dismantle their beloved Colossus, melt it down, and reuse the materials to build a new wall. Now, if you've done any sort of reading or math or watched any videos about the Colossus of Rhodes, you'll know that this statue was made of bronze, which is a combination of copper and tin. Bronze is famously durable and resistant to corrosion. But these advantages don't do much good if you don't have access to smelting technology to make more of it. So while the idea of demolishing a huge statue made of reusable materials sounds great in theory, in practice, it was just a bunch of statuesque hot air. Rebuilding the Colossus was an option the citizens of Rhodes never really considered, and that's probably for the best, because in addition to being cheap, plentiful and resistant to large projectiles, stone has a couple of other properties that make it perfect for building walls. Like it doesn't get hot when you walk on it. Most people think of colossi as eternally unchanging, monumental figures whose stoic visages have leered down at generations of mortals for millennia. But in fact, most ancient colossi weren't exactly built to last. The word colossus means statue in general in ancient Greek, and colossal statues were usually built for one of two reasons: to mark a funeral or to celebrate a military victory. Both of these functions are temporary. One day, your megalithic memorial will run out of flowers and eventually crumble into dust. And sooner or later, even the mightiest war machines will rust or crack. That means that in the ancient world, building a colossal statue was kind of like buying a fixer-upper. Sure, it cost a lot up front, but the statue would look great for a few decades, and then it would need some maintenance. But unlike your average fixer-upper, Colossus upkeep often required the work of skilled artisans and maybe a chiseling god or two. That wasn't the case with the Colossus of Rhodes, though. Unlike most of its colossal kin, Helios was built to last. Sculpted by Chares of Lindos, it was considered one of the ancient world 7 wonders because it was just so gosh darn sturdy. The statue's legs were anchored inside a massive platform below the waterline, and the rest of its structure was built around that using a sophisticated system of internal bracing. This allowed the statue to stay stable enough to endure Rhodes' notoriously windy climate without having to stake it out with additional supports. The scaffolding fell away and only the grand statue remained. When Helios was constructed in the mid-3rd century BCE, Rhodes was a bustling hub of trade. Located at the crossroads of Europe, Africa, and Asia, the island was ideally placed to control shipping lanes and collect customs duties from the titans of industry of the ancient world. The people of Rhodes used their revenue to build a culture of extravagance, but their tastes ran to the practical rather than the ostentatious. They funded harbors and trading posts instead of pyramids and palaces. The Colossus, too, was conceived as a tool, a way to impress visiting dignitaries and solidify Rhodes' reputation as an independent powerhouse. Built to guard the harbor, it simultaneously welcomed friendly ships and frightened off potential invaders. Its massive form spanned the harbor entrance, and merchants traveling through those waters knew that if they offended the Rhodians, they wouldn't just sink to the bottom of the sea. They'd be swallowed whole by the jaws of a gargantuan bronze titan. While Rhodes was happy to fund ambitious projects, they also preferred not to go into debt. And they paid Chares and his crew in full before letting them erect the Colossus. But one of the ways the Rhodians paid for the statue was with an estimated 300 talents of silver, a unit of weight equal to about 8,000 pounds. And it turns out that Chares and company were a little bit dishonest with their accounting. You see, statues aren't just aesthetic investments, they're financial ones too. And statues need constant maintenance. After all, the weather wears down your property just like it wears down your skin. So it's not surprising that statues depreciate over time. A fresh-faced Venus is one thing, but after a few centuries of relentless sun exposure, she might start looking a little haggard. So when Charis was paid in silver, he invested it not in upkeep, but in more statues. And unfortunately for Rhodes, that turned out to be a pretty bad investment. The Colossus started showing signs of wear and tear within just a few decades, and soon the Rhodians found themselves facing a tough choice: pay for repairs or let the statue deteriorate. Faced with the prospect of an unsightly visitor center, the Rhodians chose repairs. But they didn't bankroll a full restoration. Instead, they fixed up the statue's shoes, ankles, and fingers. And that might sound stingy until you consider that the Colossus had thumbs the size of modern-day barrels. With maintenance costs mounting, the Rhodians started debating whether the statue was worth the expense. By 226 BCE, their indecision had yielded a resounding answer. An earthquake shook the island, bringing down the Colossus and putting an end to its reign. In the aftermath of the disaster, Rhodes faced another agonizing choice: rebuild the statue or use its constituent parts to improve the city. The idea of melting down such an iconic symbol of the city was unthinkable to many, but it did have some obvious advantages. The Colossus would have been made of high-quality bronze, the kind that's harder to melt down. But given advanced enough technology, the job would have been doable. And since the statue lay in pieces across the island, gathering materials would have been a cinch. Once melted down, the bronze could have been reused to build houses, temples, or better yet, city walls. However, the rubble of Helios wasn't put to practical use. Perhaps it was too tainted by the catastrophe to be used in construction. Or maybe the Rhodians were just too afraid of incurring the wrath of Helios. Whatever the reason, the Colossus was never rebuilt. And while that might seem like a mistake to modern audiences, it was actually a pretty savvy move for the Rhodians. See, when the Colossus fell, it was already outdated. It was built to protect Rhodes' harbor, but by the 3rd century BCE, sea travel had changed. Ships were bigger, carrying more cargo and requiring deeper ports. In the wake of the earthquake, the Rhodians decided to build a new harbor, one that would serve the needs of the modern age. They cleared away the debris of the old and built a new Colossus, not of bronze, but of stone. If you visited Rhodes today, you wouldn't find much evidence of Helios. The island is mostly known for its medieval old town and a beach where all the pebbles are shaped like tiny balls. If you wanted to find the site of the Colossus, you'd have to head to a quiet cove on the west side of the island and peer into the murky water. But sometimes you can see the faint imprint of bronze on the seabed, the ghost of a colossal god fallen from grace. In 1929, a group of archaeologists found the sculpture that had once adorned one of the Colossus's fingers. They thought it might be a hand, and when they realized it was just a finger, they named the discovery the Rhodian finger. The sculpture shows a hand gripping a lotus blossom, the flower associated with Aphrodite, goddess of love. And that gives us a clue about the purpose of the Colossus. At the time, Rhodes was neutral in the wars raging between the Ptolemaic kingdom and the Seleucids. But that didn't mean the Rhodians were immune from the conflicts. Each king wanted the other to know that if they attacked Rhodes, it would be disastrous. In this case, art took the place of diplomacy. The gesture of a hand holding a flower was universally understood to mean peace. But the Colossus didn't survive long enough to send that message. For whatever reason, the Rhodians couldn't bear the thought of melting down their fallen god. Instead, they left Helios to rust in peace, content to keep their harbor open to the winds of war. In the centuries since, people have wondered why the Rhodians chose to leave their wounded Colossus unloved and alone. Maybe it was too painful a task to dismantle. After all, the statue was a cultural icon, the symbol of a prosperous city, or perhaps the Rhodians believed it was their duty to preserve Helios's broken form. Whatever the reason, leaving the statue in its ruined state gave the people of Rhodes a unique legacy. They were the caretakers of a fallen god, responsible for preserving the shattered remnants of a civilization's pride. Over the millennia, Helios's broken limbs have become a metaphor for the ephemeral nature of glory. They speak to the frailty of our triumphs. The story of the Colossus of Rhodes, a statue of staggering ambition, is often told as one of loss. It's a tale of hubris and fragility, of how something so magnificent and massive could be brought down by the uncaring hand of nature. On the island of Rhodes, where the Colossus once stood, there is little left to mark the spot. Only scraps of ancient maps and the whisper of legends remain. And yet somehow the statue survives in the imagination of the world, not as a memory, but as an enduring presence. The Colossus persists as a testament to human ambition and creativity, as a symbol of both the heights we can reach and the depths to which we can sink. The tale of Helios doesn't end at the harbor front, but stretches across time and across the hearts of those who have heard its echo. When the Colossus fell, it did so in a way that defied the very nature of its creation. While many of the great wonders of the ancient world met their demise, through the violence of human hands, temples burned by invading hordes, statues toppled in the heat of war, the Colossus was claimed not by human malice, but by the quiet, indifferent power of the earth itself. The earthquake that brought it down was a reminder that nature, in its slow and silent might, answers to no mortal king or god. And so the remains of the Colossus were treated not with contempt or shame, but with a reverence born of respect. In the aftermath, the people of Rhodes understood that the statue's fall was not a stain upon its legacy, but a part of it. The sun god Helios, who had witnessed countless dawns and sunsets from his lofty perch, had joined the endless march of time, becoming one with the earth he had watched over. The fallen Colossus served as a constant reminder of both the island's glory and its vulnerability, shaping how its people saw themselves and their place in the universe. It was a stark reminder of the limits of human endeavor, but also of the resilience of the human spirit. The shattered pieces strewn across the harbor became not symbols of defeat, but testaments to the creative genius that had once assembled them. And so the Colossus remained, not as a statue to be venerated or rebuilt, but as a monument to be contemplated, studied, and understood. Scholars and philosophers flocked to Rhodes, eager to see with their own eyes the remnants of what had once seemed invincible. The fallen Colossus became an object of fascination, a tangible link to an age of unparalleled achievement. In the eyes of many, it transcended its physical form, becoming a metaphor for the endless fascination humans have with the sublime and the ephemeral. The Colossus didn't just stand as a colossal statue, it was a beacon of the creative and intellectual brilliance of the ancient world. The determination to construct something so ambitious and awe-inspiring was a testament to the spirit of innovation that had driven so much of human progress. The statue wasn't just bronze and iron, it was a symbol of the potential of human imagination and skill. And in its fall, that potential was made all the more evident. The island of Rhodes became a destination not just for merchants and soldiers, but for those seeking enlightenment and wonder. Philosophers debated the merits of its construction, poets sang of its broken grandeur, and scientists examined its broken form to understand the principles that had allowed it to stand so tall. It was during this time that the Colossus became more than a mere wonder of the world. It evolved into an emblem of the